Are you struggling to access stored procedures in Entity Framework Core? You're not alone. Many developers find this transition challenging, especially when coming from earlier versions of Entity Framework. Today, we're going to simplify this process for you. I completely understand how frustrating it can be when you're used to a straightforward method and suddenly everything changes. If you've been working with Entity Framework before, you might miss the ease of generating those stored procedure objects with the wizard. But don't worry, we'll get through this. Here's the specific question we're addressing today. A user asked, how do I access stored procedures using Entity Framework Core after generating the context and class files from an existing database? If this sounds like your situation, stick around as we explore the solution. To understand the issue, let's clarify how Entity Framework Core differs from its predecessors. In earlier versions, you could easily select stored procedures in a wizard and generate an EDMX file. In Entity Framework Core, the approach is a bit different, but it's still manageable. And make sure to stay with us until the end. I'll share a practical example that will make this process crystal clear. To access stored procedures in Entity Framework Core, the user first needs to ensure that their DB context is properly set up. This involves adding a method in the DB context class that maps to the stored procedure. Next, the user should create a model class that represents the data returned by the stored procedure. This class should have properties that match the columns returned by the procedure. Now the user can call the stored procedure from their application. This can be done by injecting the DB context into their controller and using the method created earlier. Finally, the user should test the API endpoint to ensure that the stored procedure is being called correctly and that the data is returned as expected. Fun fact, did you know that the first version of Entity Framework was released in 2008? It has come a long way since then, evolving to meet modern development needs. Now, let's look at the answers provided by other users. An alternative approach to accessing stored procedures in Entity Framework Core involves 3 steps. First, create a new class that mirrors the structure of the stored procedures result set. For example, if your stored procedure returns an ID and name, define a class with those properties. Second, add a DB query property to your DB context for this new class. Finally, you can execute the stored procedure using the fromSQL method to retrieve the results asynchronously. Let's move forward and look at another answer. An alternative approach to accessing stored procedures in Entity Framework Core involves using the fromSQL method for retrieving data. For example, you can get all employees by calling fromSQL with the stored procedure name. For executing create, update, and delete operations, the execute SQL command method is used. You can insert an employee by passing the command and the employee's name as parameters. Let's take a look at an answer from another user. An alternative approach suggests creating a separate Entity Framework 6 project to generate C# classes for your stored procedure result sets. You can then copy these files into your Entity Framework Core project. If you update a stored procedure, simply regenerate the result file using the methods discussed in the linked resource. For TypeScript interfaces, consider using the TypeScript Definition Generator extension for Visual Studio 2017. This tool can help streamline the process of creating interfaces for your project. Additionally, there's an extension called EF Core Power Tools for Visual Studio 2017. While it doesn't handle stored procedures, it allows you to generate the DB context with a right-click menu, making it easier than using the command line. Let's move forward and look at another answer. An alternative approach for executing stored procedures in a MySQL database using Entity Framework Core is provided by a user. They suggest using the fromSQL raw method to call the stored procedure directly. Here's a pro tip. Always ensure your stored procedures are well documented. This will save you time and confusion when accessing them through Entity Framework Core. And there you have it. You now know how to access stored procedures using Entity Framework Core. Remember, practice makes perfect. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe for more tips and tricks.